The hum of the projector was the loudest thing in that conference room, and I remember thinking how strange it was that nobody had thought to turn it off. The slide behind my daughter-in-law's boss showed a quarterly forecast I'd reviewed myself 2 weeks earlier. My badge sat on the table in front of me, the green light blinking out and going red while I watched, like a heartbeat stopping in slow motion. The man who'd just terminated my employment was 29 years old. His name was Spencer Lockridge Vance, and he'd been with the company for exactly 14 months. His father owned 41% of the voting shares. His mother sat on the board. His Wharton MBA hung in a frame behind his desk on the 7th floor, in an office that used to be a supply closet, until someone decided he needed a view of the Charles River. "This isn't personal, Mr. Aldred," he said. He was wearing a Tom Ford suit, and the kind of watch you only buy when you've never had to wonder what something costs. It's structural. The architects you built served the company well for over a decade, but the board feels we need a forward-facing technical vision, something that aligns with where defense procurement is going. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. The HR director sat to his left, a woman named Patricia who'd hired me back in 2011 and who couldn't make eye contact with me now. Legal sat to his right, a junior associate I'd never met. Not the legal team I'd worked with, not the people who'd helped me draft the original licensing agreement back when this company was 3 engineers and a leased server rack in a converted warehouse in Waltham. Spencer slid a manila folder across the table. Severance package. 6 months. Full benefits. Standard non-compete. We're being generous, given the circumstances. I opened it. Skimmed the first page. Closed it again. The circumstances, I repeated. He smiled. Actually smiled. Like we were discussing a dinner reservation. The patent portfolio. You'll see in Section 4. The board has reclassified the core IP under the company's institutional holdings. Effective this morning, your name remains on the original filings, of course, but the licensing structure has been simplified. Simplified. Streamlined. The royalty arrangement you had. Frankly, it was a relic. Something my father agreed to when the company was small and you had leverage. That leverage doesn't exist anymore. He leaned back. The watch caught the light. My patent is worth billions now, Mr. Aldred. The market's caught up to what we built. It made sense to bring it home. I want you to understand something. I was 58 years old. I had a wife of 31 years and 2 grown daughters, one of whom had just had her first baby in Portland. I had a mortgage I'd almost paid off and a workshop in my garage where I built furniture on weekends because I liked the smell of cedar. I was not a man looking for a fight. But when he said my patent, something in my chest went very still. I looked at the folder again. Then I looked at him. "Spencer," I said, "did you read Clause 21.3? He blinked. "Section 4 is comprehensive." "That's not what I asked." "The original licensing agreement, executed February 2012. Did you personally read Clause 21.3? The HR director shifted in her seat. The junior lawyer started flipping through papers like he'd just remembered there was a quiz. Spencer's smile got tighter. "Mr. Aldred, I appreciate that this is difficult, but the legal review has been thorough. There's nothing in your original agreement that supersedes the board's authority to restructure internal IP holdings." "I'm sure that's what they told you." I stood up. I picked up the folder. I picked up my badge, the dead red light still blinking, and I put it in my pocket, because for some reason that felt important. "Enjoy your celebration, son. Sunrise is going to be interesting." I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say anything else. I rode the elevator down with 2 interns who were laughing about something on their phones, and I walked out of the lobby past the security guard who'd known me for 9 years and who said, "Have a good one, Mr. Aldred," the way he always did, because nobody had told him yet. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 20 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't punch the steering wheel. I just sat there and listened to my own breathing and thought about all the things Spencer Lockridge Vance didn't know. He didn't know that I'd written every line of the original cryptographic architecture by hand on legal pads in a basement in Somerville between 2008 and 2011. He didn't know that the patent he thought he owned wasn't one patent. It was a family of 17 interlocking filings, and 3 of them, the most important 3, the ones that made everything else work, were licensed to the company, not owned by it. He didn't know that licensing was conditional. He didn't know that I'd been the one who insisted on clause 21.3, that my lawyer at the time, an old grizzled IP attorney named Howard Brenneman who'd retired to Vermont in 2018, had pushed back against it. "Walter," he'd said, and I'm not using my own name here, but you understand. "Walter, this clause is going to scare them. Companies don't sign deals with poison pills in them." And I'd said, "Howard, if they won't sign it, we walk. Because the day will come when they forget who built this, and I want them to remember." He'd signed it, the original CEO, Spencer's father, a man named Reginald Lockridge Vance, who built the company on a handshake and a personal loan from his brother-in-law. He'd signed it because in 2012 he understood that without me, his company was 3 engineers and a warehouse. 12 years later, his son didn't understand anything at all. I drove home. I didn't tell my wife right away. I made dinner. I asked her about her day. She taught middle school art in Brookline, and she'd had a kid melt down over a watercolor project, and she needed to vent, and I let her. After we ate, I went down to the basement and I opened the safe behind the workbench. Inside was a hard drive, and a USB key, and a sealed envelope with Howard Brenneman's handwriting on the front, and a phone, a cheap, prepaid thing I'd bought in 2014 and never used, except to test that it's still turned on every few months. I powered up the hard drive. I plugged it into my old laptop, the one that had never been on the company network. I opened a file directory I hadn't touched in 3 years. Everything was still there. Still active. Still mine. My phone buzzed around 11:30. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. Same number. I picked up, "Mr. Aldred." A woman's voice, hushed. The kind of voice you use in a stairwell. "I can't say my name. Please don't say it either." "I can't say I name. Please don't say it either." "I worked with you on the 2012 filings. I'm still here." I knew who it was. There were only 3 people it could have been, and 2 of them had left the company in 2019. "I'm listening," I said. "They don't know," she said. "I sat in the legal review this morning. Spencer brought in outside counsel from New York. They reviewed sections 1 through 20. They didn't get to 21. He told them it wasn't necessary. "Why are you calling me?" A long pause. "Because what he did to you today was wrong, and because I have a daughter who's going to graduate from MIT next year, and I don't want her working in a world where this is normal." I closed my eyes. The clause is still active. It's still active. The licensing renewal was processed automatically in November. The conditional revocation language is intact. "Mr. Aldred, if you do what I think you're going to do, the company has 72 hours of operational continuity. After that, every system that depends on the encryption stack goes dark." I know. The defense contracts. I know. The bank rails. The 2 federal pilots. The Treasury integration we just signed last month. I know what's in my own architecture, ma'am. She was quiet for a long time. "Sunrise," she said. "Sunrise," I said. She hung up. I sat there in my basement, in the dim light from the workbench lamp, and I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the people who would be inconvenienced, the customer service reps, the mid-level engineers who'd had nothing to do with any of this, the contractors, the night shift IT crew. But then I thought about Spencer Lockridge Vance raising a glass of champagne at 1 in the afternoon in a conference room while the man who'd built his father's company walked out with a folder full of insulting paper. I opened a sealed envelope from Howard Brenneman. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number on it and 4 words, "When the time comes." I called the number. A man answered on the second ring. He didn't say hello. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said. "It's time, Howard. I retired 6 years ago, Walter. You knew I'd call." He laughed, a dry, tired laugh. "I knew. Tell me what they did." I told him. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for about 30 seconds. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make 3 phone calls tonight. 1 to my old partner at Wexler and Pine, who specializes in IP litigation. 1 to a man at the patent office I've known for 40 years. and one to a reporter at the Wall Street Journal who owes me a favor from 2003. By 6 a.m. tomorrow, you will not need to do anything except answer your phone when it rings. Do you understand? What about the revocation? You file it yourself, electronically, at 5:59 a.m. Eastern, not a minute earlier. I'll send you the link and the authentication codes. You hit submit, and then you make yourself a cup of coffee and you watch the sun come up. Walter, listen to me carefully. Do not engage with anyone from the company between now and then. Do not answer your work email. Do not pick up if Spencer or his father calls. Silence is the loudest weapon you have right now. Howard, yes, thank you. Don't thank me yet. They're going to try to destroy you in the next 10 days. Are you ready for that? I looked at the hard drive humming on my workbench, at the cedar shavings on the floor from last Saturday's project, at the photograph of my granddaughter taped to the wall above the bench. I'm ready, I said. I didn't sleep. I went upstairs around 2 in the morning, and my wife was awake, sitting up in bed with the lamp on, reading a novel. You're not telling me something, she said. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I told her everything. I told her about Spencer and the conference room and the folder and the clause and Howard Brenneman and the phone call from the woman in the stairwell. I told her what was going to happen at sunrise. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she put down her book and she said, "How much money are we talking about, Walter? If we win, 2.3 billion, maybe more, from the licensing back payments alone, plus damages. And if we lose, we don't lose. The clause is the clause." She was quiet for a long moment. "And if they try to hurt us first, then we have to be ready." She nodded slowly. Then she got out of bed, walked over to her dresser and pulled out the bottom drawer. She took out an old wooden jewelry box, her grandmother's, from Pittsburgh, and she opened it. Inside, under a tray of earrings, was a small notebook. "I've been keeping notes," she said, "since 2019. Every time you came home and told me Spencer's father had done something strange with the books. Every time you mentioned a number that didn't add up. Every time Patricia from HR called you in for a casual chat. I wrote it down. I have dates. I have quotes. I have my own corroborating timeline." I stared at her. "You never said anything." "Walter," she said, and she sat down next to me on the bed and put her hand on my knee. "I've been married to you for 31 years. I know what kind of man you are. I knew this day was coming. I just didn't know when." At 5:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I hit submit on the electronic filing. The conditional revocation went through. A time-stamped receipt appeared in my inbox 17 seconds later. At 6 a.m., the sun came up over Boston Harbor. At 6:14 a.m., the sun came up over Boston Harbor. At 6:14 a.m., the first system started failing. It was the API gateway that handled authentication for the defense logistics platform. The cryptographic handshake required a validation token signed by the licensed encryption key. When the license terminated, the token validation chain broke. Within 9 minutes, every downstream system that depended on that gateway started returning the same error. Cryptographic authority not recognized. At 6:31 a.m., the Department of Defense procurement portal, which the company had been integrated with for 4 years under a $890 million contract, sent its first automated alert. At 6:47 a.m., my phone rang. Spencer Lockridge Vance. I didn't answer. My phone rang. Spencer Lockridge Vance. I didn't answer. At 6:52 a.m., it rang again. Same number. I didn't answer. At 7:08 a.m., my wife brought me a cup of coffee in the backyard where I was sitting on the porch step watching a pair of cardinals fight over the bird feeder. We didn't say anything. She sat down next to me, and we drank our coffee while my phone buzzed in my pocket 23 more times. At 7:40 a.m., Howard Brenneman called. I answered. "It's begun," he said. "It's begun," he said. Wexler and Pine filed the emergency motion at 6:30. The Patent Office has acknowledged the conditional revocation. The Journal is running the story at 9. Walter, you need to be at my partner's office in Boston by 10. We're going to be in a deposition by Thursday. Understood. One more thing. 2 FBI agents called my partner's office at 6:50. They want to talk to you. FBI. The company has been representing the patent as wholly owned in its 10K filings for 3 years. Securities fraud, Walter. Material misrepresentation to shareholders. This is not a civil matter anymore. I closed my eyes. I felt the cool morning air on my face. I felt my wife's hand on my arm. "All right," I said. "I'll be there at 10. The Wall Street Journal story dropped at 9:03. By 9:30, the company's stock was down 19%. By 11, it was down 34. CNBC was running a Corona, said Defense Tech GR can't faces, IP SRIS. Bloomberg had a panel of 3 analysts trying to figure out what clause 21.3 meant. I didn't watch any of it. I was in a deposition prep with Howard's old partner, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s named Elena Markovich, who walked me through every question I might be asked and every document I'd need to produce. At 1 in the afternoon, Reginald Lockridge Vance, the father, the founder, the man whose handshake I'd trusted in 2012, called my personal cell phone from a number I recognized. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. I listened to it that night with my wife. "Walter, it's Reggie. Listen, I just got off the phone with my son, and I want you to know that I had no idea. I had no idea what he did. I was in Geneva all last week. I just got back. Please call me. We can fix this. We can falter. You have to understand, he's young, he's ambitious, he made a mistake. We can sit down. We can renegotiate. The original royalty structure. I'll honor it. I'll double it. Walter, PSS, call me back." My wife looked at me. "Are you going to?" "No." "He sounds desperate." "He should be." The board fired Spencer on the second day. They put out a press release at 4 in the afternoon Eastern, citing a need to restore confidence with key technology partners. He was escorted out of the building by the same security guard who'd said, "Have a good one, Mr. Aldred," to me 48 hours earlier. It didn't matter. The damage was done. The Department of Defense suspended the procurement contract pending a full review of the company's IP claims. 2 major banks pulled their integrations. The Treasury pilot was put on indefinite hold. By the end of the first week, the company had lost 61% of its market capitalization. I want to pause here and tell you something. I am not going to pretend I felt nothing. I felt a lot of things. I felt vindicated, yes. I felt a kind of clean, cold satisfaction when I read the headline about Spencer being walked out. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But I also felt sick. There were people who lost their jobs that week. Not the executives. They had golden parachutes. They were fine. But mid-level people. A QA tester I'd mentored for 2 years named Diana, who emailed me on the 3rd day to ask if there was any way I could help her get a reference. A junior systems engineer named Marcus, who'd been at the company for 10 months and who got laid off in the first cost reduction round. A receptionist who'd remembered my birthday for 9 years. I helped where I could. Diana got a job at a startup in Cambridge after I made 2 phone calls. Marcus, I hired directly into my new venture, which I'll get to. The receptionist, a woman named Gloria, retired and moved to Florida with the severance, and she sent me a Christmas card that year that just said, "Thank you for being a good man." That's the part nobody talks about in stories like this. The cost. The collateral. It's why I tell young engineers now, when they come to me for advice, protect your work. Document everything. Get the clause in the contract, because the day will come when you have to use it, and on that day, you need to know that what you're protecting is bigger than your own pride. The FBI investigation went on for 14 months. The civil case settled out of court in month 7. The company paid me $2.41 billion in back licensing fees, statutory damages, and punitive damages for willful infringement. The settlement was confidential, which is why I'm not using real names here, but you can find the public filings if you know where to look. Reginald Lockridge Vance was forced out by the board in month 4. He sold his estate in Lincoln and moved to a smaller place in Naples, Florida. The last I heard, he was on the speaker circuit, giving talks at small business conferences about leadership lessons. I almost laughed when I read it. Spencer Lockridge Vance was indicted in month 9 on 3 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of wire fraud. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Massachusetts brought the case. He took a plea deal in month 12, 36 months in federal prison, minimum security, plus a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. His Wharton MBA is still on his LinkedIn, which I think tells you everything you need to know about him. I went to the sentencing. I didn't need to. Yelena advised against it. "You don't need to watch him fall," she said. "You don't need to watch him fall," she said. "You've already won." But I went anyway. I sat in the back of the courtroom in a navy suit, and when the judge handed down the sentence, Spencer turned around and looked for me. I think he wanted to see if I was smiling. I wasn't. I just nodded at him. The way you nod at someone who finally understood something they should have understood a long time ago. In the spring, about 18 months after that morning in the conference room, I got a letter from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It was a formal recognition of my contributions to encryption technology used in national security infrastructure. There was a ceremony in Washington. My wife and I flew down. My older daughter came in from Portland with the baby. My younger daughter drove up from DC, where she's a research analyst at the Brookings Institution. The director of the patent office shook my hand. A two-star general from the Department of Defense shook my hand. A senator from Massachusetts, whose name I'm not going to drop here, shook my hand and told me, quietly, "Mr. Aldred, the country is grateful." I cried in the cab back to the hotel. My wife held my hand and didn't say anything. About a month after the ceremony, I started my own company. Not a competitor. I had no interest in fighting the same battles twice. A research lab. 8 engineers, 3 of them from my old company. We work on cryptographic primitives for post-quantum systems. The Department of Defense is our largest customer. We have a small office in Kendall Square and a bigger one being built in Austin. Marcus, the junior engineer who lost his job in the first cost reduction round, is now my director of engineering. He's 28. He runs a team of 6. He came into my office last month and asked me how I knew, back in 2012, that I needed to put the clause in. I told him what Howard Brunneman told me, all those years ago, sitting at his desk in his old office on State Street with a yellow legal pad between us and a cup of coffee gone cold. "The clause isn't for them," Howard had said. "The clause is for the version of them that doesn't exist yet. The son who hasn't been born. The MBA who hasn't been hired. The board that hasn't been formed. You're not protecting yourself from the people sitting across from you today. You're protecting yourself from the people who will sit across from you in 20 years and look at what you built and decide they invented it." Marcus listened. He nodded. He wrote it down in a notebook. I told him to read clause 21.3 in every contract he ever signed for the rest of his life. He said he would. I want to end with one more thing. Because I know how stories like this get told. I know they get framed as revenge, as payback, as one man finally getting his due. It wasn't revenge. I want to be very clear about that. Revenge is what Spencer Lockridge Vance thought he was facing that morning when his system started going dark. Revenge is what his father thought he was negotiating with when he left me that voicemail. Revenge is what the Wall Street Journal called it in their follow-up piece a year later. But it wasn't revenge. It was a contract. A contract I'd written in good faith with another man who'd signed it in good faith, with another Nan who'd signed it in good faith more than a decade earlier. A contract that contained a single clause, clause 21.3, which laid out in plain English what would happen if the licensee ever asserted ownership over the underlying intellectual property without the express written consent of the original inventor. I didn't break anything. I didn't steal anything. I didn't sabotage a single system. I just stopped renewing a license that they'd voided themselves the moment Spencer slid that folder across the table and said my patent. The rest was just the natural consequence of a young man who couldn't be bothered to read what he was signing. It wasn't about the money. I'm not going to insult you by pretending it wasn't about the money at all. $2.4 billion is a lot of money, and I'd be a fool to pretend otherwise. My granddaughters will go to whatever colleges they want. My wife and I bought a small farmhouse in the Berkshires last summer. I'm building her a studio out behind the barn, but the money wasn't the thing. The thing was the truth. The truth was that I built something. I built it with my own hands, in a basement, over years, when nobody believed in it except for me and one old retired lawyer who saw what I saw. I built it carefully. I built it well. And I put my name on it. And when a young man in a Tom Ford suit decided that my name didn't matter anymore, the world had a chance to find out whether names mattered or not. It turned out they did. So if you're watching this, and I know some of you are young engineers, or young scientists, or young inventors of one kind or another, I want you to remember 3 things. 1. Read every word of every contract you sign, especially the ones you draft yourself. 2. Never humiliate the person who built the foundation you're standing on. They remember. They always remember. And 3. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the loudest warning anyone will ever give you. When the man you've just fired stands up, smiles, and tells you to enjoy your celebration, pay attention. Because the sunrise is coming and you might not like what it brings. That's the whole story. That's everything that happened. The projector in the conference room is probably still humming. Somebody eventually must have turned it off, but by then I was already gone. I've been asked more times than I can count in the years since whether I would do anything differently, whether I regret how it played out. And every time I sit with that question honestly, the answer is the same. No, not because I enjoyed it. I didn't. But because every step of what happened was the natural consequence of choices other people made, and the only thing I controlled was whether I'd be ready when those choices arrived at my door. That's what I want you to hear, more than anything else. Cause and effect. It's not mystical. It's not karmic in some grand cosmic sense. It's simple bookkeeping. Spencer Lockridge Vance made a choice in a conference room on a Tuesday morning. He chose arrogance over diligence. He chose to read section 4 and skip section 21. He chose to humiliate a man in front of his colleagues because he believed humiliation was a tool of leadership. And every consequence that followed, the broken contracts, the FBI investigation, the 36 months in federal prison, was the bill coming due on that choice. I didn't deliver it. I just stopped paying it for him. His father made his own choice 12 years earlier, when Reginald sat across from me with a fountain pen in his hand and signed clause 21.3 because he was a young man building something and he understood that honor meant something. The version of him that existed in 2012 protected me. The version of him that existed in 2024, who let his son run wild and who flew to Geneva while the company burned, did not. 2 men, same name, different choices, different bills. What I want young people to take from this, and I mean young engineers, young inventors, young anybodies who are building something with their hands and their minds, is that integrity is not a feeling. It is a practice. It is the boring work of documenting everything, of reading every clause, of insisting on terms that make the people across the table uncomfortable. It is the unglamorous discipline of staying in your seat at 3 a.m. when the laptop screen is the only light in the basement and your back hurts and the work is hard. Strength of character is not the moment you stand up in the conference room. By then, it's too late. Strength of character is built in the years before anyone is watching, in the small decisions to do the work properly, to write the clause carefully, to keep the backup drive in the safe, to call the lawyer who tell you something you don't want to hear. I am not a wise man. I'm just a stubborn one, who got lucky enough to have a wife who kept her own notebook and an old lawyer in Vermont who knew the day was coming. If there is a lesson, any of this, it is that the world will eventually present you with a bill for who you've been, and the only useful preparation is to make sure your ledger is honest. Stay honest, stay patient, and read the fine print.